The French government is very likely to collapse in a couple weeks after its prime minister triggered a no-confidence vote over his proposed budget. France's deficits have grown in a way its economy could only dream of, and the latter is really the matter here. Political instability, ongoing political instability, is a symptom of our forgot-how-to-grow world. And since the forgot-how-to-grow economy is remembering how to do worse, you know what that means about future political instability. France is not a unique case. It's another reminder for the rest of the world. A big part of the problem is that politicians have had their lies about robust recoveries exposed. All those who had claimed the economy was soaring the past few years have been thrown out of office. Voters have had enough of the artificial sunshine. And France is an absolutely perfect example of just what I mean here. On the surface, there doesn't appear to be all that much wrong with it. GDP has been positive in 16 out of the last 18 quarters. Yet, GDP in the latest quarter was a whopping 4% below where it should be. To give you some context, from top to bottom in 2008 and 2009, French GDP fell by 4%. They can say the economy in France is recovering or even growing, but it really isn't. The French are falling further and further behind, and this should sound familiar. As a consequence, employment drops, unemployment rises, the government's deficits already high simply get higher. Voters demand more extreme answers that none of them actually have. Political instability isn't just inevitable, sadly, it makes a lot of sense. And it's all over the world too. Now everything seemed to die down with the focus turning to trade wars across the world, but as I said, the forgot-how-to-grow economy didn't go anywhere, and now as it's starting to remember how to do worse, it's putting pressure all over the place, not just in the political sphere, but well beyond it. And so in France, it's right back into the boiler all over again. And so now the French government has to put up with another crisis of no confidence. As CNN reported just yesterday, France could find itself heading for another snap parliamentary election, a government minister suggested on Tuesday, after opposition parties said they would vote to oust Prime Minister François Bayrou as the French markets also tumbled. Now, Bayrou jolted the political establishment out of its summer slumber on Monday with his unexpected move to seek a September 8th confidence vote on his debt-cutting plan. The country's main opposition parties were quick to make it clear that they would be voting against him and his minority government. And quoted by Bloomberg, "We will obviously vote against confidence in François Bayrou's government," Marine Le Pen said in a social media post. François Bayrou clearly has not understood the French are fully aware of the economic and financial crisis in which our country has been plunged after 8 years of Macronism. At least Le Pen sees the economic angle behind all of this. That's what everything continues to be about. It's the economic decay which produces the volatility in politics, just like in markets, not the other way around. But instead what you're hearing, and we heard this last summer too when France went through this and beyond, is that political instability is a source of economic stress. Therefore, it threatens to disrupt the nascent recovery that everybody's convinced Europe and the rest of the world are already just about to head into. It's the politics that disrupts the economy. Therefore, stop disrupting the politics and get with the program so the economy can get going. They've got the cart before the horse here. The economy is bad, which leads to the political instability, not the other way around. As we continue to talk about all of the downside possibilities that continue to pile up here in 2025, it makes perfect sense, therefore, to own gold. But gold, as a great store of value and error hedge, is still missing something. It's missing something big, and it's what we talk about all the time here at Eurodollar University. What it's missing is the ability to use it, to go back to where it was a long time ago, as both a store of value as well as a medium of exchange. And that's where Glint comes in. They're actually working to solve this major problem, to make gold useful again. Not just a great error hedge, but something that you can actually spend. This is allocated physical gold stored in a secure Brinks vault. It's fully insured, it's fully yours. With Glint, you can buy gold, you can save it, and you can spend it almost anywhere MasterCard is accepted. At the grocery store, for airline tickets, at the steakhouse, online shopping, it doesn't matter. You swipe and a fraction of your gold is sold in real time. You still own the gold until the moment it's used. No middleman, no IOUs, no derivatives. This is gold as money again. So go to your favorite app store and download the Glint Pay app and use referral code SNIDER so they know that I sent you, and see how they're rebuilding money and rebuilding trust in money 1 gram at a time. Again, that's Glint Pay in the app store. Use referral code SNIDER. And now let's get back to our video. And we're hearing it here again in August of 2025. Again, going back to Bloomberg. France's latest bout of political instability is set to endanger a nascent economic recovery as companies hold off on hiring and investment. What crap. With lawmakers preparing to topple the government in a September 8th confidence vote called by Prime Minister Francois Bayrou, company executives are likely to want to see how any new administration gathers support and addresses the need to narrow the euro area's largest budget deficit. That's certainly not what's holding back Europe's employers, especially France's employers. As we'll see here, the economic statistics make plain what's really happening. The economy is bad, therefore the political situation becomes more and more unstable, especially as everybody in the political realm says we have the answers for the economy, and if you just give us more power and authority, we'll fix everything for you. And then when they don't fix everything, we have to go through this over and over again. The economy drives everything, not the other way around. We saw this last year. France held snap elections last summer, which saw Macron's party lose its majority, meaning there is no majority in the French parliament. So after the distraction of trade wars and the lack of any progress on the economy, the French government is, just like the Fed and its rate cuts, picking back up where it left off this time last year. Political instability is a symptom of the economy, not the other way around. There is no nascent recovery. France, like the rest of Europe, has been stuck in recession for years. They can call it sluggish growth all they want, but it's the reason for the budget deficit being this high and the shakiness of the government as a result. This is yet another angle on the world being forced to pay for the pandemic and the lockdowns, to finally pay for the supply shock, which impoverished the entire world and put everyone on this course. China's credit crisis, the growing housing bust in the United States, rising unemployment across Europe, the French budget disaster, they're all the same thing. Or, to put it better, they come from the same thing. These are consequences of depression economics. And as a result, the numbers in France are truly staggering. They do have a deficit problem, but the deficit problem that arises in large part, from the economic problem. There are, of course, other political issues to go along with it, but a huge part of this is everyone expected the economy to help the governments around the world, not just in France, pay for their out-of-control ways. CNBC reported yesterday, the government argues cutbacks are needed to tame a deficit which totaled 5.8% of gross domestic product in 2024, a figure it says will continue to rise without action because the economy is continuing to fall off. The European Union states that its members should target a 3% deficit ratio in order to reduce excessive debt. French economic growth, according to CNBC, has been sluggish. There's that word. Cooling to 1.2% in 2024 from 1.4% the previous year, and sluggish is too tame of a word. The growth is non-existent. France's economy hasn't collapsed and it isn't crashing, but it is absolutely forgot how to grow. There is not nearly enough economic growth to support constant state spending. It's another major miss of the 2020s, having rapidly raised government commitments, all expecting a real recovery to enable politicians to pay for everything. It's basically the same mess since 2008. So the economy doesn't recover and it instead weakens. Authorities come in and claim it needs their support, so they go out and borrow a bunch of money from the bond market, which, given depressionary conditions, is only too willing to own the most liquid assets. So officials immediately waste that money in the most unproductive spending programs, financing the stupidest and most economically ineffective ideas. Then they stand back and marvel at how their spending didn't stimulate the economy, instead only worsened the fiscal standing of the country. And then they have the gall to do it all over again, rinse and repeat. They come in to support the economy or claim that that's what they're doing, waste a bunch of funds, make the economic situation worse, and then say, we're going to do it all over again because the economy needs our support. It all comes back to that one variable. The economy doesn't change. China has perfected this course more than anywhere else, but France is really giving them a run for their borrowed money. And it all comes down to, as I just said, forgot how to grow, at least in the 2020s. In the 2010s, it was a silent depression. Now we've added to it a forgot how to grow style of it in the 2020s. I mean, look at French real GDP. That's output adjusted for prices. It's been mostly positive for the vast majority of the time since 2020. Going back to the start of 2022, quarterly GDP has been negative only twice out of those 18 quarters. In both times, just the smallest minuses, not even 0.1% in each one. Yet, just look at the GDP chart. The growth rate very clearly changed at the start of 2022, which was before the ECB's rate hikes, by the way. It was looking like a recovery, but then once prices soared the most, that was it. End of story. The French economy was among the first in the world to forget how to grow. But they won't call it a recession, even though it absolutely is. It has fallen behind by a whopping 25 billion euros, which doesn't sound like much, but that's per quarter, every quarter. And that's also a quarterly rate. In percentage terms, France's GDP is now off by 4%. The worst recessions in history rarely get to be that big. In fact, just to give you an example, I already mentioned this in the intro, French real GDP from the top of the 2008 crisis to the bottom in 2009 was minus 4%. That's how much output France is missing every single quarter. And as you can see, it only gets worse. The contraction grows larger. The country and its workers and consumers fall further and further behind. So the government borrows more money to try to either fill in the gap or, most often, just spend funds it doesn't have and won't get, trying to placate voters just enough to stay in office. And it is set to get worse this year. The French government's own projections are calling for a minimal 0.6% increase in real GDP for all of 2025, which will only expand this gap even farther, meaning France's economy falls further and deeper into the hole, imperiling French workers and jobs even more than we can already see. There already is and has been nowhere near enough economic expansion to maintain employment levels. So, not surprisingly, after a couple of years of trying to hang in there, we've seen payroll growth and payrolls themselves shrink in France, putting even more pressure on this volatile situation. Payrolls dropped slightly in the second quarter, which were basically flat from the first quarter, but that was with enormous assistance from the artificial tariff distortions. Once those more completely clear out, jobs are going to disappear all over again. In fact, they already seem to be. France already reported as much with an unexpected jump in jobless claims for the month of July. They had been rising into the end of last year. In fact, they rose sharply into the end of last year, but then they slowed, and jobless claims even fell sharply in April due to the frenzy of activity among the French trying to beat all the tariffs. It was a temporary spike in labor demand, fewer officially unemployed from March through June. But then here in July, like we see around the rest of the world, look at China, payback really does start to emerge. Jobless claims in July suddenly soared by 53,000 against expectations for a flat to slightly lower change. So for France, what do? Well, you either tackle the economy, which they can't do, or you tackle the deficit, which there is no political will to do. They're caught between a rock and the hard place. But here's the thing, the rock and the hard place are the same thing. It's the forgot how to grow, which is really just another way of saying we never recovered from the pandemic and the lockdowns. But there's another thing to keep in mind, the German example. Now, what politicians, central bankers, and the media always do is say, okay, so what the economy isn't as great as we thought and what we said. But looking forward, there's a nascent recovery, as we saw in the Bloomberg article. We don't want to disturb it. If everyone would just do what we say and agree with our genius plans, we master politicians will be able to right the ship and set sail into prosperity all over again. But there is zero reason to believe any of that. And voters, by and large, don't. Most of them, which is why we keep seeing political instability all over the map, repeatedly in Europe. To begin with, everyone knows they've been lied to for years already, so trust is at an all-time low. Government spent the entire decade so far claiming they'd engineered red-hot, enormous recoveries. People are finally finding out that was all a lie that most people could sense at the time anyway. And remember, it wasn't just France's government that fell apart. Earlier this year, the German government did the same thing. And for the same reasons, the German government kept saying, oh, the economy's getting better, it's getting better. It never got better. As bad as it has been over in France, the German economy was far worse too. And that was with overly optimistic GDP data Germany had given us before. Prior to the most recent benchmark change, German GDP has been the absolute best illustration of this forgot how to grow dynamic. Real output wasn't contracting in absolute terms, so they could always avoid using the recession word. Instead, it was almost perfectly sideways. In Germany, weirdly alternating positive and negative quarters for 12 straight. That's 3 years. One up, the next down, then up and down all over again. It was the forgot how to grow recession in a nutshell. A lot of noise going nowhere and plausible deniability for the political class, but not anymore. The latest benchmark changes from the German government instead, they show there really was a recession from 2022 onward, or at least it was a recession that was beyond forgot how to grow, more recognizable. GDP, as it turned out, did not alternate by quarter. Of course, we knew that. And instead had fallen consistently for 7 quarters, starting in the fourth quarter of 2022. And then there was only one tiny fractional positive right in the middle of that 7-quarter recession. But then, starting last year, German GDP picked up. And beginning in the third quarter, it finally a positive that built into the fourth quarter. And then it hit 0.3% in the first quarter of this year. And it was said to be rate cuts, of government policies, any number of nonsense factors were attributed to the nascent recovery in Germany. In reality, it wasn't a recovery at all, nascent or not. 0.3 is nothing, barely 1.2% annual rate. And after 2 solid years of contraction before then, taking 3 quarters just to get to 1.2% is a sign that things are not actually recovering, that the contraction at most is just pausing. And it was, largely due to the artificial activity, especially the fourth quarter of last year and the first quarter of this year. We've seen it worldwide. It was never any reason to get excited, especially how it would have to be paid back moving forward, which is exactly what started to happen in the second quarter in Germany, just like we're seeing starting to emerge in France. Now, at first, the status over in Germany said GDP contracted in the second quarter, but only by 1/10. So the nascent recovery narrative was on life support, but still alive at that point. But in the latest data, which just came out, that 1/10 minus is now 0.3, and it is much clearer that Germany, like Japan, for example, never really escaped the forgot how to grow recession at all. It was only a temporary reprieve, and that's a lesson for Germany, France, Japan, Europe, and everywhere beyond. Now, one final note, for monetary matters, which is something we're always going to keep our eye on here at Eurodollar University, the France-Germany bond spread. Now, bond spreads in Europe can have a huge impact on global collateral flows, and they can create disruptions if the spreads get to be too high. We saw that repeatedly with the Italy-Germany spread. So it's just something we're going to keep our eye on as we travel toward the September bottleneck, which, by the way, is something I've already covered at Eurodollar University's deep dive analysis. So we've got a whole bunch of macroeconomic considerations coming from Europe and maybe even some financial leading into monetary ones as well, all because of the single fact we never recovered after 2020 and 2021. It was all an illusion, and we have to pay for it in all of these various ways and all around the world. So France has had positive GDP, yet zero recovery. The gap to anything resembling a healthy situation there has ballooned to 4%, and that's each and every quarter moving forward. Plus, as the French government already said, it's going to get worse here in 2025, and it's not looking better in 2026 or beyond. So no wonder voters aren't having it. Eventually, the French government had to fall, since voters there expressed their anger in many different ways, pointing in many different directions. They don't have answers. Nobody has these answers. They're looking for them, but they aren't available. And like everyone else, the French can tell something big is wrong, even if they don't know exactly what it is. That's the worst part of forgot how to grow. It's even the reason I had to invent the term to begin with. The economy we've had doesn't look like recession in the traditional sense, though Germany's now does more so. Yet the end result is basically the same anyways. But in many ways, many other ways, it's worse because the pain and misery gets spread out year after year after year after year after year. And in that situation, Political situations are not going to be stable. It's another offshoot and consequence of all these depression economics. France is not just a good example, it is a caution and a warning to the rest of the world. We're starting to see more clearly all these different ways the world has to pay for the pandemic and the lockdowns. China's credit crisis, France's budget deficit, the US housing bust. Went over those details in the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Huge thank you, Eurodollar University members and subscribers. And until next time, take care.